Jared and Emma and Micah, tell us a little bit about yourselves. Introduce yourselves to us.
Yeah, we're glad to be here. I'm Jared. I am the grandson of Gary and Joy Redding, Jared Redding, and grew up in Kansas, Heston, Kansas, just outside of Wichita. And yeah, I grew up in the church there in Heston, and would get down to Sierra Vista every couple years. And Gary and Joy would come up to Kansas about every year to see us. And so always had a connection with Sierra Vista. And after college, became a youth pastor back at my home church in Heston, and met Emma around that time.
Yeah, do you want to continue about how you got to missions?
Oh, sure. So, yeah, I was always wanting to serve the Lord with my life, and thought I would do that, whether it was locally or nationally, whether it was a youth pastor or a volunteer youth worker or helper in the church in various ways. But I never thought I'd do missions and be someone, that did overseas work. And so when Emma and I started dating, we started talking about how we wanted to use our lives for the Lord and use our marriage for the Lord. And Emma had a heart for overseas international missions. And I thought that was a little crazy, but she was quite the woman of God, and I wanted to be around her. And as we started figuring things out, international missions was more and more on our radar, and we started moving forward in that as we dated and got engaged and then became married.
Yeah, so my name is Emma. I grew up in Southeast Iowa. Grew up in a believing family, going to church. But then I would say when I went to college, moved away, went to college, that was when my faith really became my own, like I'm sure is the case for so many college students. And during my time at college, I was roommates with a really great gal, grounded in her faith, very mature, missions minded. And at that time, missions was not on my radar at all. I grew up in a rural agricultural area, and so everyone farms and no one leaves the farm. And so I knew about missions and I knew what it meant to be a missionary, but not something I'd ever considered, not something I'd really been exposed to until college and meeting this girl. So our time together, having a lot of conversations about our faith and what missions look like, and just what God was asking each of us to do, and I'm just talking about the Great Commission, what that meant for us individually. That really began to stir my call for missions. And so I got in touch with a lady from my hometown who I knew made yearly trips to Nigeria. She's actually my elementary PE teacher. That's how I really knew her. And so I got in touch with her and just shared what was happening in my heart and what I felt God was calling me to do. And I expressed interest in going with her on her next trip to Nigeria. Because one, I had never been out of the country. And so I thought, well, God, if this is what you're asking me to do, I kind of want to dip my feet in a little bit to see if this is really for me. And so I talked with her and she said, of course you can come. And so a couple months later, was in Nigeria with her for a couple of weeks. And those 3 weeks were short, but they confirmed everything that I'd been feeling. My time there, although it was short, but I felt such an overwhelming sense of joy and fulfillment, not because of the work we were doing in those 3 short weeks, but just because this is what I knew God was asking of me, and I knew this is what he wanted me to do with the rest of my life. And so I returned from that trip, had not met Jared at that point, and I was bound and determined to return to Africa by myself as soon as possible. And so I couldn't wait to finish my nursing degree so I could do that. And then shortly after that trip, met Jared, who was a great guy, but had no interest in cross-cultural overseas missions when I met him. And so it was a bit of touch and go there. It was nothing to do with what we thought about each other. It was just that our desires and passions at that time did not align. And so we thought, well, we love each other, but we just don't see how I can honor what God is asking me to do, and how Jared can honor what he felt God was asking him to do. Didn't seem to align. And so after talking with pastors and mentors and some other people in several months, we came together and just decided that, you know what, God's going to use our marriage and use us. And so, and at one point, Jared said, because I had such a strong passion for Africa, Jared said, I'll go anywhere with you but Africa. So that was a little bit of a friction point anyway. So that's how we kind of met and ended up in missions. As far as how we ended up in Peru, we contacted Pioneers International. This is the organization that we're serving with. We're familiar with them because several missionaries from Jared's home church are part of that organization. We'd heard great things about it. And so we contacted them and started talking with them. And at that point, we knew that we wanted to go somewhere, and we were willing to commit to long term, but we had no idea what kind of work we wanted to do or where we wanted to do it at, what people group, nothing. And so we went into the organization undesignated, but through that process, actually it was during our informational week in Orlando with the organization, 3 specific times during that week, I just felt the Lord leading us to animistic people groups. And I shared that with Jared one night in the hotel room, and he said, you know, I kind of think the same thing. And so then we shared that with the organization, and they gave us a database of all of their teams working with animistic people groups. And so we narrowed it down to a team in Peru, Brazil, Gabon, Ghana, and Myanmar. And funny enough, at that time, I still had a strong desire for Africa, but Gabon and Ghana, 2 countries in Africa, we never heard anything back from those teams. For whatever reason, God clearly shut that door. But that's what I needed to have a peace, to be able to look elsewhere. And so Brazil was off the table. They weren't looking for foreign missionaries anymore. They were only recruiting nationals. Myanmar was off the table for a couple of reasons. And so that left, I guess Bolivia was in the mix. Also, if I mention them. So Bolivia and Peru are our only options. And we really liked the Peruvian team. They had a launch team, which allows us a softer landing to the mission field. It's a year that focuses on culture and language before you do anything with any kind of ministry. And so we thought that was a really good thing for us, being young and green at this. And so we felt pretty strongly about that team, but we were advised, well, why don't you just visit Bolivia, just to have something to compare it to, just to be sure that Peru is where you want to go. And so we visited both back to back, a week in each place. We went to Peru first, and instantly it felt like home, that this is where we want to be. We had a peace about it. We went to Bolivia, and it was great, but just clearly not for us. So God really confirmed to us that Peru is where we're supposed to be, and he united us in that decision. So.
Wow, that's awesome. Could you just briefly explain what kind of animism or animistic practices are happening in the Peruvian people?
Yeah, so you could define animism as when people put gods in a number of different spirits. Yeah. And so it depends on the different tribes within the Amazon jungle, but, you know, we've heard of rain gods and fertility gods and corn gods, and it really all depends on kind of the context of what tribe it is, but they might hear of Jesus or hear of God, our creator, and think, oh yeah, that's another God, but that would just be along with their 18 other gods that they've heard or their ancestors sacrificed stuff to, or their grandparents tell them about. So it just kind of gets lumped in as opposed to being the only true one God.
Yeah, and they are very in touch with the spirit world. So God would be an accurate term, but more accurate might be spirits. they use a lot of spirits and they call on spirits, and that's how they communicate with their ancestors. And for example, like in a tribe, someone might die and they might think that someone from another tribe sent a spirit to kill that person. And so they might send a spirit to the other tribe to kill someone. And in America, in our culture, you might hear these things and think, well, none of that is real. That's all made up. And I'm not saying all of it is real either, but in their culture, in that context, there are some really, I don't know.
The spiritual realm is very dark, and it's a reality to them.
It's not made up. These things are real to them, and real in general in some cases. So yeah, a lot of spirits, and like Jared said, syncretism is a big problem in that culture. So within Peru, there's basically two cultures, the Peruvian culture and then the tribal culture. And so the Peruvians in general the mestizos is what they're called, don't have a lot to do with the tribal people. They look down on them, they think they're dirty, they're ignorant, they don't want anything to do with them. And so there is a distinct difference in those two people groups, but then within the tribal context, you have multiple people groups.
Yeah, and that'd be similar to, us as Americans versus, Native Americans or Indians on reservations, whether it be in Arizona, New Mexico, wherever. Some people have this stigma towards them. And so, yeah, there's definitely a stark contrast.
It's we've been keeping up a little bit with your prayer letters, and you've talked a little bit about your language training, and that you're going to continue to do that here while you're back in Iowa. And the adventure that was bringing Micah home, and we've been following along with that. But this last year, how would you say your language training has been going?
Really well. We had, from the get-go, we were paired with a great language helper. And so this man would come to our house 5 days a week for 3 to 4 hours a day. And we're using a language method called the BEC, Becoming an Effective Communicator. And the way that works is we don't call him a teacher, he's our language helper. And so we plan the lessons, and then he basically comes and just speaks the words for us. And so we have a native speaker helping us through this. And it's applicable to the tribal context where we're going to be learning Ashenica, because they don't have teachers out there. They've never formally taught someone else their own language. And teaching a language is a lot harder than you think. Like, we're native English speakers, but I can't teach English. I don't know if you've ever tried to teach someone else English. It is not easy. And so this gentleman would come to our house and we'd plan the lessons. And there's a couple different levels. We're at level 3 right now. Yeah, do you want to add on that?
Yeah, all things considered, our first year was really smooth. We transitioned well into the culture. Having this awesome language helper was a huge help. The launch team, which is our training team, they set us up for success. They prepared us for the things we needed to expect within the culture, the things that we needed to be aware of or navigate within relationships. And then we found a local church to plug into, and that fostered Peruvian relationships. And that's what we desire, to be connected with the locals and with the nationals. And so we had a great first year, praise the Lord. And our language has progressed. We've taken some phone evaluations through an international organization, and we're both within the expectations of being in level 2, level 3 type learning. And our goal for this next year is to be far enough along to where we can join the Ashenica team and move past Spanish onto the next language.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is Ashenica similar to Spanish, or is it really different?
Quite different.
Yeah.
Not all similar. Word that we came across when we visited, we were reading their hymn book, I think, one word had 26 letters in it.
Wow.
So we got a long road to go.
Yeah, but the blessing is a lot of them do know Spanish because they have interacted with Peruvians and other nationals that only know Spanish, so they've been forced to know Spanish, and they do some Spanish in their Ashenica schools. And so we do have a bridge language that we'll be able to work with, but our desire is to operate in Ashenica and preach the gospel in Ashenica so they can understand it the clearest.
Does the Ashenica have a written language as well?
Yes, they do. They have, I don't know what year, but Wycliffe translated the New Testament, and they're currently in the process of revising that.
Awesome. Very cool.
In the 90s, they got that New Testament translation done.
So what do you think are going to be your biggest challenges over the next year that we can be praying about and just checking in on you over?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The first thing is wisdom for when to go back. Right now, we're laying low in Iowa, as many people are laying low around the world with this COVID-19. And so, the borders might open in a month or two, but is it wise to go back even when those open? So that's our first main prayer request. And then just continuing to stick with Spanish and progress in that so we can then move to the tribe sooner rather than later. Because our desire is to live among the Ashenica people. And since it is a more difficult language, it'll probably take 3 to 5 years to really master that. So the sooner we can start going on that, the sooner we can get to more ministry focused, impacting communities for the gospel.
Yeah, and logistically speaking, we need to get started on our jungle house as soon as possible because rainy season will start to set in around October, November, and it'll make building really difficult until next March or April.
Yeah.
And so we'd really like to get going on the house and have it done before rainy season starts. But with everything changing, we don't know if that will happen. We don't know when we'll be able to start that. And the wood has to be cut several months in advance in order to properly dry before we can start building the house. And so there's a lot of moving parts that go into it. So just all of the logistical details as well.
Yeah, trusting the timing of the Lord is going to be a theme for this next year.
Yeah, and one more, just pray for all of our Peruvian friends that we feel like we kind of left behind. They're struggling financially and physically in a lot of ways. Praise the Lord, none of our close friends have gotten sick yet or have gotten deathly sick or have died. But I'm sure there will be a lot of losses when we return. And so just be praying for just the Peruvian people.
Speaking about healthcare, how do you feel, as a young westernized mother who's now doing this missions with a newborn? How do you feel the medical care situation is going to be for you as you go back?
Yeah, it's something that's always been on my mind, even before Micah was born, before we got pregnant. I knew, and as a nurse, worst case scenarios just come to my mind all the time. Yeah. But now actually having Micah in my arms and all of those just feel, all of those worst case scenarios feel a lot more real. So it is something that's on my mind, but it's something that I try not to dwell on, or else I'll go crazy. It's just something that we've had to give to the Lord. I mean, we've chosen this. We've chosen to follow God to Peru, and we know that He will provide. And we know that doesn't mean that He's going to keep us from all sickness and all harm, but we know that He'll sustain us if something does come. Yeah. So it is a little scary, but it's in God's hands.
I really appreciate your faithfulness and just emulating that for us and our congregation as well. What it looks like to step out into scary situations, trusting in God and His ability. Another question I have for you guys is, how can we best serve you, at least over this next year or a couple of years? What are some ways that we can be of better service, better partners with you guys as you are pursuing this mission work?
Sure. I would say the first thing that comes to mind is just encourage us. Maybe it's a handwritten note that you mail to us, or just responding to an email newsletter. It's such a blessing when people read our newsletters and then say, "Wow, what a cool answered prayer! How God showed up!" Like, it's not about us; it's about Him and His work. And so to hear from you guys and to have that encouragement really sustains us in a lot of ways. So that's one way. Yeah. Other ideas?
Yeah, for me, that's the biggest thing, to hear back from someone in the States saying, "Oh, we've been praying for you," or asking like, "Oh, how's it going?" Means a lot to us.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we do as a church is we do a mission spotlight every Sunday. So we'll highlight a different missionary, and we'll share the newsletter that you sent with all of our people. And so it comes in the bulletin. And so usually Gary is the one who brings up an aspect of that mission. And so just to know, even if you don't hear from us as consistently, we are praying for you. Usually probably about every other month you're in the rotation. And so we've been keeping up at least on that level. But yeah, we'll definitely look at better ways to kind of communicate. And so we pretty much talked about everything that I had on my agenda. Now, what I like to do is kind of end with like a lightning round, and then I will give you an opportunity to share whatever you want with the congregation. So the lightning round, I'm going to ask you questions like, what's your favorite food, your favorite book, your favorite movie, just fun little things that we can get to know you better, and kind of try to stimulate kind of some discussion. And it would be nice if we could have you back over here in Arizona and have you for dinner sometime. And it would be kind of a similar conversation. We just get to know you. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to do something silly. But so what is your favorite movie?
All the Bourne movies is my answer. Bourne Supremacy, Bourne Ultimatum, all those.
Nice. Good choice.
Jared would tell you I can never remember a movie that I've watched. So I don't know. Chick flicks. I don't have one specific movie.
Chick flicks. All right, good. What about favorite books that you read, apart from the Bible, of course?
I really like Radical by David Platt. Just really like it.
Yeah.
Again, can't pick one, but Karen Kingsbury. I really like reading her books.
Karen Kingsbury. Okay. Yeah, Radical was really good. I really appreciate Platt.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite food?
Shrimp. Any shrimp, all the time.
Probably barbecue.
Barbecue. Okay. Now, what kind of barbecue are we talking here? Because that's a contentious issue.
West barbecue, the ketchup brown sugar based barbecue, not the watery vinegar stuff.
Brown sugar base. Good. Okay. What is your favorite place that you have ever seen, been to, or maybe someplace you'd like to go?
Hawaii.
Someplace I'd like to. I want to go to Ireland.
Ireland. Nice. Very nice. All right. Well, that ends my lightning round. It was good to get to know you guys a little bit better. Do you have anything that you would like to share with the congregation before we end this recording?
Yeah, we just want to thank you guys again for your support. It was fun visiting you guys about 2 years ago by now, when we got to the West Coast, and we plan on seeing you guys again next year on our furlough. Again, a lot of that's up in the air with all the COVID stuff, but our plan is to furlough next year and make the rounds and try to get down to you guys as well. So it's a blessing to have so many people support us from all corners of the nation, and Sierra Vista is basically a corner of the nation. So we're very appreciative and grateful.
Yes, we are. And I would just leave you with, as sometimes we think missionaries are just the people that go to another country, go far away, and never come back. But missions happens everywhere. It happens in our home. It happens in our town. A lot more than it does internationally. And so it's not a far off idea. It's not a far off person. but it's something that we're all called to do. I mean, Jesus left the Great Commission for all of us, and that applies to our daily life.